Hey everybody, this is Space Marine Steve from Play on Tabletop here at Hyperspace Hobbies. Got my good friend Ian in the studio with me today.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, and there have been some real big changes. Really big changes. I posted a video not too long ago kind of expressing some of my initial thoughts and initial feelings on this particular topic of the balance sheet. Right, so the balance sheet and also the transition to the Arcs of Omen series and like that whole season that's coming up is quite a big deal. And we're here to talk about what the most dramatic changes are to Space Marines. So, welcome to Master Chapter. This is the first time I've had somebody on the show.
Big surprise.
Big surprise. It's
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And so we're going to talk about what some of the most dramatic changes actually are.
And there were a lot of changes. For Space Marines, there was the most changes, I
Yes.
think, compared to the other armies. Though a lot of other armies got buffs and debuffs and minor changes and secondaries and stuff.
Yeah.
But Space Marines got the brunt of the changes. And I'm really curious as to what you think the biggest change is for Space Marines from this particular change up.
It's a good question. I mean, what the biggest changes are? There's so many, as you said. I think that the biggest change is the loss of Armor of Contempt.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that this is the biggest change is because we are no longer able to keep up with the output of some of the like apex predators in the ecosystem of the meta.
Yes.
Right? So like there are a lot of books that churn out a lot of shooting. Like honestly a dumb amount of shooting and a dumb amount of really strong shooting. Books that come to mind are ones like Tau, Eldar. Tyranid has actually got a lot of really good shooting, even with their points changes and whatever.
Yeah, Tyranid have a crazy amount of shooting.
A crazy amount of shooting, and it's all really good shooting. That's the problem. The problem is when you match volume with really strong armor piercing, like a Space Marine. When you compare profile to profile,
Yeah, I get
them
you.
to other books, it's just like laughably bad. Like,
Also, now a really hard matchup for Space Marines is Space Marines
yeah, really hard matchup
because
with
they
Space
do have a
Marines.
fairly high volume and high AP.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and so because there's high volume and even honestly mediocre AP, it doesn't even need to be good to kill a Space Marine.
now
Like,
those -1s that like some armies have across the board are gonna sting so bad.
exactly right. So I think that the most dramatic change that alters the way that we're going to play
Yes,
is Armor of Contempt.
for sure.
Right? Because that loss is drastic. Because it affects literally every single model in the range,
Right.
right? And it makes models that were playable because of Armor of Contempt unplayable.
It actually doesn't affect every model in the range. Some models, anybody with a Storm Shield, now gets that +1 and doesn't have to worry about the
yeah, that's
I'm
totally
paying
true.
for a Storm Shield, but I don't get Armor of Contempt
Yeah,
because
you're
I have
totally
the Storm
right.
Shield. So
Yeah.
at least there's something there.
Yeah, so that's why that's the reasoning behind why I think that's the most like dramatic change is because it affects almost like asterisks by that almost every single
Yeah.
model across the Space Marine
It's a
range.
huge change.
It's a huge change.
Yeah.
It's a huge change. What about you? What do you think? So what is the most dramatic change according to Ian and why?
Well, to try to lighten the mood from the loss of Armor of Contempt, to lighten the loss of Armor of Contempt, Space Marines have sweeping points drops across the board. There's huge amounts of free war gear that also got thrown into the mix. So saying, oh, now without Armor of Contempt, I'm going to be losing guys left, right, and center, and then try to balance that out with the fact that you're probably going to have more guys on the battlefield. There's kind of this weird ebb and flow, and without playing a couple games and really getting into it, it's going to be hard to see how the balancing worked out. Now, there are some clear winners when it came to the points drops, for sure. One of them, I believe, is Assault Terminators. No longer having to pay for a Storm Shield and a Thunderhammer is huge. They are very cheap now.
Yeah.
In comparison to what they used to be, hugely cheap.
Yeah, that's very true.
All the Gladiator variants that have been sitting on the shelf took big points drops. Big points drops. And they're good units. The problem is that the points that they have, you can't justify putting it on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Whereas now there's the potential to be like, okay, where does this fit in this little microcosm of other units that sort of do the same thing for around the same points? And I feel like some of the Gladiator variants might be coming out on top in that kind of little small shoebox.
Yeah. Especially so, what you're talking about does that kind of sit well with what I was talking about, because I believe that it's two sides of the same coin. The trade-off, we lose Armor of Contempt, but Games Workshop needed a way to keep Space Marines around for longer. For a little while, Armor of Contempt was how they did that.
Yeah.
It had a bunch of trickle effects that they didn't anticipate.
Right.
And didn't really want. And so now we're going back to this other way. Well, we'll give you more Space Marines.
Yes.
That's the okay, well, if you need to be on the table for longer, we'll just make it more of you. You'll have more.
And some of the points drops are big. They also, because of free war gear, you can take a lot of unique things that you were kind of being like, I'm not going to take that because it's 10 points and I can't afford it, even though it's kind of interesting and makes a unit unique.
Yeah.
You didn't take it because you were worried about the points.
Yeah.
And hard to justify. Now you just get to take it. So a lot of units that had a unique piece of war gear that you didn't want to pay for now get that unique piece of war gear, and you kind of get to play with your toys a little bit more because, like, for instance, the infiltrators now that dropped in points have free war gear, and they can take a Helix Gauntlet. And not everybody does that.
Yep.
And now you can for free.
Yep.
Not only is that unit great, has great effect on the battlefield for screening your opponents, for stopping their deep strikes, now you can save a guy from dying using this Helix Gauntlet.
Yeah, 100%.
All of the grenade launcher upgrades on the Astartes grenade launchers on your just basic guys.
You take them.
Might as well take it.
May as well take it.
Yeah.
So we've kind of broken down what we think the most dramatic changes are, and I think that these two changes, I agree with you that your choice is definitely up there. Like, there's some other changes that took place, but I think we've pegged the two major changes.
Yes.
Right? These affect playing Space Marines the most.
Right.
So I think, you know what, we're going to keep talking. However, you're going to have to wait until the next episode of Master the Chapter to hear what we think. So we are going to keep talking, and I'm going to jump off something that you said when you were telling me about the points changes, and you said one of the biggest winners.
Yes.
And so you pulled out one of the biggest winners of what you thought was the biggest winners. So I think that we're going to take a break from this one. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Master the Chapter, where we talked about the most dramatic changes. And next time, Ian and I are going to be talking about who we thought, or what we thought, was the biggest winners and losers out of the changes to Space Marines from the GW balance update sheet. Okay, so do you want to sign us off, Ian?
This is Ian and Steve from Hyperspace Hobbies. You've been watching Master the Chapter, all about the new Space Marine update.
Hell yeah.